Welcome to That Workplace Experience podcast, the podcast where we look at the best designed workspaces and the people behind the projects. In this episode, we're talking about Hackney Bridge, a vibrant meanwhile workspace and cultural destination in East London, developed by Makeshift and designed by Turner Works. Today, we're going to be chatting to Carl Turner, founder and director of Turner Works. We discuss how meanwhile architecture transforms underused sites into thriving, community-driven workspaces, that Hackney Bridge has been designed to be a hackable ecosystem that blends workspace, food and events, and how designing for adaptability, affordability and creativity supports local businesses and fosters long-term urban impact. If you want a more detailed deep dive into this project, please check out the show notes for our PDF link, and for a more visual experience, watch the show wherever you get your podcasts to see footage of this incredible space. So Carl Turner, founder and director of Turner Works. Tell us a little bit about the business.
Yeah, we're predominantly architects, but I suppose I'm a slightly unusual architect in that I think of myself as a builder maker, really. And I've also I'm known for specialising in meanwhile or temporary projects. So as well as my day job as an architect, I was the founder of Pop Brixton and Peckham Levels, Hackney Bridge, and a project in Ashford called Coachworks. And those are all kind of temporary meanwhile spaces that we might unpack a little bit about what they are. But I guess with those, I thought of myself really as a community developer, really looking at how you could take a site short term that you didn't own, find investment and create something really special for local people.
Going back to sort of Hackney Bridge then, how did you get started on that as a project?
Yeah, so we, having set Pop Brixton up, we built a team, we created a sort of what we called a top company called Makeshift, with the idea of making a shift in kind of development and things being quite temporary or makeshift. So we set a company up that could, because obviously having set Pop Brixton up and lots of people kind of sitting up and saying, wow, this is amazing. How do we get one of these? Like local authorities and landowners. And so we had a lot of incoming inquiries with people with land or buildings that maybe wanted to do a similar thing. And Peckham Levels was actually Southwark Council putting out a PQQ for the empty levels, as they were known, of Peckham car park at the time.
Yeah.
And they kind of, said, oh, maybe you guys would like to pitch for it. So, we went through a pitch process and eventually won that. And we basically brought the ingredients of Pop Brixton, but figured out how we could slot them into like 6 empty floors of a multi-storey car park. And it's, probably 3 times the size of Pop Brixton. So Hackney Bridge came about through a similar process that LLDC had this empty piece of land, and that's the London Legacy Development Corporation, so the Olympic Park kind of authority body that look after the Olympic Park. So they also had in their legacy plan that they had to provide space for meanwhile uses.
Yeah.
So this site had been kind of allocated for meanwhile use, and to cut a long story short, lots of people had looked at it, couldn't quite get it to work. They approached Makeshift, and then Makeshift said, yeah, we'd really love to try and do something here. So what usually happened was that we would start doing consultation to find out what the need is in the area, also what's missing, what's available, what's working, what's not working. So we try and build a brief for the site based around the idea of local needs, and but with that kind of background idea of maybe it's 2/3 workspace to 1/3 food and drink and events. The affordable workspace that we've established a local need for is then powered by the kind of food, drink and events, and that's the public facing bit that makes it exciting and a great place to be. But really it's an ecosystem of stuff going on 7 days a week. So yeah, that was how it came about. So eventually Makeshift as a team, we put a bid together and a business plan, and kind of deals were done, and I think it was a 12-year lease. So all of these buildings, Pop Brixton was a 3-year lease initially. Now it's grown to 10 years. I think Peckham Levels is something like 15 years, and Hackney Bridge, which is using the same ingredients again, but new buildings, but temporary new buildings. So bringing similar kind of vibe and ideas, but figuring out how can we afford, in terms of making it sustainable but also affordable and viable. How can we build new buildings that might only exist for like 12 to 15 years?
Yeah.
It's quite a challenging business model.
Yeah.
Also having to borrow money at quite high interest rates because it's quite risky.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an amazing thing that we've achieved as a team.
Yeah.
And so by the time we actually got going with Hackney Bridge, I'd stepped down from makeshift and from helping to set up Pop Brixton and Peckham levels. I'd kind of fallen back to focus on my day job, which is being a really good architect and an urban designer. And so we were able to fall into the role really of architect on that project.
Yeah.
But also having, being essential to the whole kind of idea, we're able to, the team that we then built in makeshift were able to really deal with the business plan and the kind of, the consultation, and we were able to focus on what the buildings might actually be.
So talk us through the buildings then. So what did the scheme end up as for people who haven't seen it?
Yeah, so it's 5 buildings. It used to be called Clarnico Works many years ago, so it was where tree bore sweets were made. And things like sherbet lemons and things like that. So it's quite a famous. Originally, we thought we might call it Clarnico Quay, but anyway, it ended up being Hackney Bridge. So 5 buildings. They're lightweight steel frame buildings. So they're what we call built for disassembly. So it's like a giant Meccano kit. It was all made off site, brought, bolted together. It was built during the pandemic. The whole thing was delivered in less than 6 months. So it was incredibly fast. Lightweight buildings, pretty well insulated, and they're basically fully building regs compliant new builds. I guess the only sort of relaxation we got is they didn't have to comply with like strict BREEAM codes because there's a kind of like offsetting because it's very temporary. So, 5 buildings, 3 along the canal side, so it fronts onto the canal, and they're designed really to look like old warehouses. And the 3 along the front are the public buildings. So there's a restaurants and bars, there's a big food hall, and then a separate event space, like a box in a box event space for 400 people. And then the 2 buildings towards the back of the site are workspace. So one is more like maker spaces. I think there's 6 maker spaces on the ground floor that we thought of, like railway arches, so the kind of things that you do in a railway arch all over London. That's the kind of space we were providing. Above co-working, and then a separate building with a community cafe and 6 kind of maker space or retail units with their own shop windows. And then above that, I think there's like 20 odd studios. So again, Pop Brixton, we realised that the studio space, one 20-foot shipping container, it's about 120 square feet. It's the same, more or less the same as a car parking bay in Peckham levels. So that's how we set the car park out with parking bays. So then the studios, I think they're slightly bigger, like 150 up to 200. But essentially, we realised that kind of sweet spot between 100 and 200 square feet, space for like 1 to 4 people. The idea being that it's all your bills are included. It's one monthly cost. When you look at the square foot rates, it's quite expensive, but actually the individual monthly cost, it makes it really affordable because you don't get very much space.
And I think if you're starting up a little business as well, you don't want the headaches of all the different bills coming in.
Exactly.
Keeps it simple.
Yeah, and it's really easy in, easy out terms, quite short lease terms, and so the idea is it's incubator space to fail if you need to, so you can try and start a business. Most businesses don't work out, so it's good if you can start something where you don't have to invest very much money, you're not taking a huge risk. If it doesn't work, it doesn't ruin the rest of your life. You can kind of move on to the next thing. So that's the whole idea. And, we've already seen within Hackney Bridge that some of the businesses that have started there have already moved into some of the emerging new spaces as they're beginning to appear on the Olympic Park. So housing blocks with kind of other stuff at ground floor. So we're kind of ready making tenants to fit into those. And they've already built their community. So like hairdressers, barbers, coffee shops, and they're plugging into more permanent space, which is the whole point of Hackney Bridge is to make a place.
It's interesting, it straddles Hackney Wick and the Olympic Park. And obviously you've got these two different, very juxtaposed styles, I guess. You've got one that's got quite a lot of character, and then you've got this sort of more clean and pristine Olympic Park. I'm assuming it's fairly intentional the way you've created it's not only non-permanent, but it doesn't. It's not. There's a lack. It's not as precious, so it feels like you can tweak things, and you wouldn't feel bad putting a sticker on and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. I think we want to design spaces that are hackable, that you can mess up a bit, and in fact, we really wanted to bring a bit of the organised chaos from Hackney Wick into the Olympic Park, which can feel a bit sanitised. And so there's a great primary school next door. So Hackney Bridge, acts for all different types of things at different times of the day. So parents kind of drop their kids off, then they congregate at Hackney Bridge, pick them up again in the evening. So there's all of these little moments throughout the day, and Hackney Bridge acts as a great foil for them. But we worked with Jan Katijn, who did an amazing bit of consultation with Hackney Wick. I'm going to call them residents, but it was really workspace residents. So they did a really long piece of work and really looked at what the spaces that were in Hackney Wick, many of which are being lost because those buildings are gradually being turned into housing, which is also needed. And so we really, what we looked at was what kind of space do creative people need, what's the optimum sizes, what are the other things they're looking for, and that's really what drove the design of Hackney Bridge. So the idea of buildings around courtyards, where the courtyards are much more kind of part of the workspaces, so people spill out and start making stuff, and they're creative, and then in the evenings and weekends, all that stuff gets put away, and it turns into visitors come in, and it turns into a sort of event space and music festivals and gatherings and drinking and eating and all of that kind of thing. So we brought that model over really from Hackney Wick, and we kind of were pretty certain it would work because we'd listened really carefully to what people said they wanted, and we'd obviously learnt a lot of lessons from Pop Brixton and Peckham levels.
One thing I love about your work is there's always a really bold use of colour right the way through. I mean, even in the courtyards, you've got really nice pops of colour in the graphics on the floor, and even the bigger units like the bar, big bright colours. You said to me before that it's a really easy way to make a big statement.
Yeah, I guess we're living more in an Instagram world, and we saw through moments on staircases at Peckham levels.
Yeah, I think I've got a few in my Instagram actually.
Yeah,
still.
we got a kind of Pinterest award through the post for like the second most pinned thing in London one year, that we didn't know that this was happening.
Didn't know it was an award.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess we've learnt those lessons, and also we're working with buildings which are temporary. The budgets are really challenging, and colours are a really easy way to add some vibrancy. So at Hackney Bridge, each building has got kind of different colour accents, so window frames and metal railings, that kind of thing. So it's a way of helping with wayfinding, because it helps to differentiate different areas, and working really closely with graphic designers and branding people, using big graphics. And Hackney Bridge has got some great artwork, logos painted on the buildings. So we're not precious about the architecture. In a way, we get the ball rolling, but the buildings are very much background architecture in a way. They're strong and bold, but we want them to be taken over, and we want the tenants to be able to, which they have, just kind of put things on the walls and customize them. And the bits of cities I like best are you get little museum places where everybody starts to occupy the pavement outside with pots and plants and things. It's much nicer when people are allowed to actually take spaces over, and that there's not some kind of authority saying you're not allowed to put that sign up or paint that a different colour. So we want space to change over time, definitely.
Well, I think there's a lack of fluidity in a lot of spaces, isn't there?
Yeah, I think a lot of architecture is designed to be kind of perfect, and that if you move anything or change anything or even put the wrong furniture in or the wrong sign up, somehow there's a sense that the designers are so precious that it's kind of ruined. There's a time and place for that. There's certain buildings that you want to be slightly more carefully curated, but the spaces that we're creating, part of the reason it feels like home for people, it's their place where people spend a lot of time at work, and we want it to feel it's not being done for people. They'll be able to do it themselves, customize their spaces, and feel that they've got their own space, so their own studios or shops or little maker spaces, but they're also part of a bigger ecosystem.
You mentioned home before, and you've kind of made Hackney Bridge your home, as in the Turner Works home. Did you design it with that in mind?
So yeah, we moved in already nearly 3 years ago, actually, into Hackney Bridge, and we're so busy. We've just, we actually repurposed the furniture that we made in Pop Brixton. We brought it to our second home in Hackney, and now we've moved it for the third time, and we've expanded a bit more each time and built a bit more. It's all built of OS board and plywood. So yeah, we've been recycling our own. So it felt like home straight away, because we had all of our own weird furniture that we built ourselves. So yeah. In fact, we're just thinking about how we can change our own workspace to maybe reflect the way that we want to work, which is potentially a bit more siloed around, the process, around ideas, around testing and prototyping, and then around delivery. So we're just thinking about how we can maybe give our own workspace a refresh, to think about maybe the way that architects might work going forward in a way that might be more understandable to clients, rather than just talking about RBA work stages, which is all a bit confusing.
Yeah. And obviously, being right in the centre of it, you can see everything, how people are interacting with it. Is there anything you'd change about what you've done there at Hackney Bridge?
I think it could have been done with being larger. I think more space. I think maybe a bit more intensity, and so it's now had 2 or 3 different operators, which is a long story. Accretions have been added, which I'm not against, but maybe they could have been done slightly better. They could have asked us to help design them. Just again, it sounds like I'm a controlling architect, but just there's a balance between small interventions, and actually if you're adding a big thing, maybe not putting it there but putting it over here would be a better idea. So I think it could do with being a bit bigger. It does overheat a little bit during the summer. I mean, that's the thing with temporary buildings. You can't throw the kitchen sink at them because they are temporary. So it's fine during winter, and I think generally it's working really well. There's not an awful lot that I think needs to be changed. Again, if we'd had a bit more money, we could have spent a little bit more money on things. Things could have been a bit more generous. Maybe some of the WCs, things like that, could have been slightly better quality. So, after 5-6 years, things start to get a bit tired. So it's that adage, buy cheap, buy twice. So if you, there's a certain threshold, isn't there? If you can just spend too much money on things, but if you're really hamstrung by a low budget, then you do end up, having to fix things quite a lot.
Yeah, but it has got a fairly decent lifespan, I think, isn't it? We were talking about that the other day, about 13, 14 years.
That's right, yeah. I think the lease was originally 12 years, but I'm assuming it's going to go on for longer because, basically there's 7 plots that are going to be built out. So it's part of Eastwick and Sweetwater development, and eventually the site will have stuff at ground floor level, a bit like what we have on site now, but it'll have housing built above it.
Right.
So they were originally thinking they'd build 1 site per year, but after 5 or 6 years they've only built about 3. So we're hoping that probably they'll be a bit longer. And then the idea is, hopefully, we've got 5 amazing buildings. They're kit of parts, so they can be taken down. Worst case scenarios, they're recycled. Best case scenarios, they're then repurposed and moved somewhere else. So hopefully they'll go on to have a decent lifespan.
So as you touched on slightly earlier, it's kind of ended up as a sort of pilot scheme for Florenzia Village, if I'm saying that right, in Haringey.
Yes.
So you almost tested it, improved it, and moved it on for this light industrial park.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was a very nice story. General Projects saw the project, Hackney Bridge, in an architecture magazine. This hardly ever happens. Somebody sees it in a magazine, calls you up and says, "We want one of those. We've got a site for it." And of course, they didn't want a facsimile. They wanted to evolve the idea of it, but they could see that the way that we'd built it meant that it would be viable in a challenging market. So, because we'd looked at using timber to build Hackney Bridge, but mainly for supply chain reasons, but also a little bit about cost and risk. It wasn't possible to build it from timber. Of course, it's possible, but it just wasn't possible within parameters. So we used the same methodology to build a much bigger version. I mean, it's a kind of, it's a turbocharged version of Hackney Bridge. So it's a BREEAM Excellence building, net zero carbon in use. The roofs are covered in PVs. It's got sustainable drainage. It's heavily insulated. So it's kind of, I mean, I doubt whether there's been a more sustainable industrial building built in the UK to date.
Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully we've learnt. So again, it's bigger. I think Hackney Bridge is about 30,000 square feet, and Florentia, the new bit, is about 100,000. So it's more than 3 times the size.
Big scale, yeah.
Bolted to an existing 60,000, so it's more like 170,000 square feet in total, I think. So yeah, it's got the overall kind of density that you need to create a really long-lasting community. And I think we've brought the ideas of colour and a bit of joy and fun. And inside the units, we've got our trademark OSB, which is the kind of flaky looking chipboard material.
It's got a lovely warmth to it.
Yeah, it warms the spaces up.
Aren't you, though?
Yeah, and again, we're sort of relying on generally everything's kind of fixed together with screws and nuts and bolts. So it's thinking long term about how buildings can be removed when they need to be.
Have you approached the same sort of nighttime, daytime theory of this sort of round the clock? Because I know with Hackney Bridge, you mentioned before, you've got this multi-use thing. You've got the office the way, and the parents coming in the morning, and then the nighttime events. Are you trying to achieve that as well?
We're hoping that will evolve, and that will depend on the tenants that come in, really. So it's in what's called a kind of protected industrial work area. So it's a more conventional campus for making, but what we're hoping is that there'll be whole series of maybe like food producers, maybe coffee roasters, microbreweries. So there'll be some I guess some hipster uses that will take space. I think a microbrewery is in discussion, so that you'll get some of that happening organically, but general projects would love the idea of eventually, if there's enough people there, that we could develop a street market there. Maybe even start with a monthly street market, because we've got this great. So we created a kind of public route through the site. So the idea is it's during the day, it's an open campus. People are encouraged to walk in. There's already a coffee shop, restaurant in the existing space, which the general public can use. So it's not a closed shop. The idea is that if businesses that move in there have got public-facing functions, then it will really break it up. So it's not just the idea. We're trying to move away from the idea of a kind of slightly grey business park, where there's a kind of the somewhere selling bacon sandwiches out of a caravan at the edge, and it's all a bit windswept and bleak. And then the attic spaces, I guess it's inspired. Really, our thinking's coming from lots of kind of art space studio providers. So that creative kind of space that lots of small manufacturers need, but they maybe don't need a big light industrial space like we have on the ground floor. But everything from graphic designers, filmmakers, architects, clothing businesses. There's already things like bicycle manufacturers and all sorts in the existing village. So I think it's going to end up being a real ecosystem, and very much general projects. So they have their own operational side called General People. So that's quite rare, and that's what makes it work, I think, is that they operate and run the site. Yeah. So it's that idea of long-term custodianship, where you're able to curate the offer. And within our own projects, we always talked about bringing in businesses that complement and not compete with each other, but also what's in the surrounding area. So again, it's that looking for what's missing, looking for local talent, providing space for talent, and So I think all of that thinking is definitely, General Projects already had a lot of that in previous projects that they did. So we're really the architects for this project, but I guess our knowledge and our passion goes a lot deeper, because we've delivered places like similar to this ourselves previously.
And have you got any advice for people thinking about workplace experience specifically, how you might apply a meanwhile mindset to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think like we talked a lot about the idea of workspace being more like a temporary evolving space, and I guess a few years ago we were already thinking about workspaces as being more experiential, and so the idea that it's more like a stage set and that things can move around, because especially now, if you want to attract people into work and you want to create vibrant cities, if everybody stays at home, the city's not going to be that vibrant. You want to attract people into work. I like the idea of working from home myself as well. I do a couple of days a week. But actually, to create a vibrant workspace, changing things on a regular basis keeps it fresh. And so therefore, I think you need flexibility. So that's, that idea of everything being pretty flexible. So we approach a lot of our projects as a sort of kit of parts thinking, so where the furniture can create kind of partitions and rooms, and not thinking of something as being like set in stone, that we're designing this workspace, wow, it's going to look amazing, because I always find as soon as people move into a space, they immediately want to change things. So thinking about it as a sort of temporary stage set is the way to go, I think.
Carl, thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. Love your approach to meanwhile and how it's influencing the rest of your work. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.